and welcome to Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. We have a fantastic show for you tonight. You'd all know because I put her on the thumbnail who the guest is. We have Dr. Joni Johnston. She's been on the show. I can't call her a frequent flyer, but she's been on the show before. And every time she's on the show, I get such good comments by all you guys, because obviously she's much better looking than either Mike or I. So that's one good thing, but she's also extremely competent. So many things occurring in the Bryan Kohberger, the Idaho 4 case, and so many things that we would like analyzed by a professional, and so many things since the show on Dateline NBC, where a lot of things came out that we, being the public, the general public, and us content creators, didn't necessarily know about. And now that they're out there, it's free to comment on them. And many people, I have diverse opinions about Bryan Kohberger, many of them. Many people, as I get some of the hatred in the text, think he's innocent, and they think that we're pushing a guilty narrative. We advertise right in the lead up to this show. This is true crime from a police perspective, and that's our perspective. And we analyze the evidence, and that's our opinion. You don't have to believe with us. That's why it's good to go on different shows and see what the opinions are. So anyway, folks, hold on to your hats, hold on to your loved ones, hold on to your cup of coffee, hold on to your wig, hold on to your toupee, hold on to your service dog. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. You're about to enter the off the cuff zone, the police off the cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
They were the ones who called 911 to get him help, and now they're calling for change.
And now a word from our sponsor. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for all your sports betting action. Baseball season is in full swing, and we're into the NBA and the NHL playoffs. And BetOnline has more ways to stay in on the action with the latest odds, news and scores, even live in-game betting while the games are being played. With the largest selection of odds on everything from Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and UFC, BetOnline remains the best online source for all your sports wagering info. In between games, head over to the BetOnline Casino with all the top Vegas-style games, including poker and live casino. BetOnline, the game starts here. Joining me tonight, of course, I'm going to bring him right on because he's chomping at the bit to get into this show, is retired NYPD Sergeant, professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, attorney. Welcome to the show, Professor Mike Geary.
Bill, good evening. Thank you for having me on.
Always a pleasure to have you, Mike. And one of my favorites, she's from the left coast, they call it in New York, right? She's from California. Forensic psychologist, just all around great person. Welcome to the show, forensic psychologist, Dr. Joni Johnston. Welcome, Dr. Joni.
Thanks for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're really glad that you are here. You're always a pleasure to have on. Dr. Joni, I mean, so much came out on that Dateline NBC special. And I'm wondering, like, who was feeding Dateline NBC this information that most of us didn't know about? And what it dealt with a lot was Bryan Kohberger's Google searches, his online searches, just a bit of what was on his cell phone, because I'm sure there's a treasure trove to be found on his cell phone of searches that he made. Now, in regards to some of his searches, one of the things that early on in this investigation, it was said probably a year and a half, 2 years ago, that they felt whoever the killer was, or once they did find Bryan Kohberger or link him to these 4 murders, they used the word incel. And that stood for someone who's involuntarily celibate. And in this case, he was at the time of these murders a 28-year-old, 27-and-a-half-year-old man. He's 30 right now. So would being an incel lead to the hatred of women?
Well, I think the first thing to point out is I know both of you know very well is that this is certainly not a clinical term that anybody uses. So it just became kind of a term that was used to describe a certain, I guess, category of men who were unhappy, felt cheated by women in their lives, weren't able to get the women that they wanted, felt like women preferred the Chads of the world, which are these kind of popular, good looking, guys that they couldn't get. And so as a result of that, kind of bonded together over this misogyny to some extent, and also this anger over lack of success with women. And so I think if we look at certainly some of Bryan Kohberger's behavior and some of the things he's said in the past, how other people have reported him engaging with them, including people that he's met at bars, including, some of his professors that were women. He certainly does fit some of the, I think, characteristics that we associate with that group. Somebody who is not able to be successful with women and is angry about that. So I think to that extent, we can say, yeah, he might fit that category. I'm not aware that he was ever affiliated with the group, that he ever visited, chat rooms or anything like that. But I definitely think he might share some qualities with that.
But just from a personality perspective, based on your clinical interviews of other persons that fit this same sort of little mold and perhaps that square peg in the round hole type person, does that go back to my original question? Does that lead to the hatred of women?
Does it lead to mistreatment of women?
Yeah. Okay, let's use that.
I mean, it can certainly. I mean, we all know that certainly beliefs, attitudes, values often precede what we do. So because somebody thinks a certain way, believes a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to act on that. So you probably have a lot of people who may be angry about their lack of success with the opposite sex, feel some resentment about that, who aren't going to go out and act on that and mistreat the opposite sex. But there's a correlation between them. So absolutely, somebody who has that anger and resentment is more likely to act on that.
Mike, before I get to you, I just want to play this short little video, and then I'm going to get right to you.
Internet activities have come to light. The 30-year-old who has been accused of fatally stabbing University of Idaho student Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonsalves, Xana Kernodle, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin in November of 2022, was active on Google in the weeks before and after the killings, according to records from Kohberger's phone in the possession of law enforcement obtained by Dateline. In addition to searches on infamous serial killer Ted Bundy, the records indicate Kohberger made online inquiries for pornography with the words, quote, forced, passed out, drugged, and sleeping, per the phone data. But that's not the only activity discovered by law enforcement on his cell phone. In court documents, authorities said they found a selfie of Kohberger, quote, taken from his phone on November 13th, 2022, only hours after the homicides at 10:31 a.m. In the photo, which was attached to the filing, Kohberger, dressed in a button-down shirt and with Bluetooth earbuds in, stood in front of what appeared to be a shower as he smiled at the camera and held up a thumbs up. And according to the court documents, the state intends to introduce the image of Kohberger because of the witness, who was only identified as DM, says she saw a male in the student's home wearing a ski mask that only revealed his nose and eyes. She also told police she remembered his, quote, bushy eyebrows. According to docs, the state also intends to share Kohberger's driver's license, which lists him as 6 feet tall, to compare against the witness's description of, quote, male, white, skinny athletic build, a few inches taller than DM, who stands at 5'10", not someone she knew, with bushy eyebrows. The statement reads, quote, whether or not Bryan Kohberger can be described as having bushy eyebrows is a factual determination to be decided by the jury.
So interesting. Mike, do you have a question for Dr. Joni?
I do. Dr. Joni, I got a question for you. It regards Dr. Catherine Ramsland, who is like an expert on serial killers. And I think basically the most important ones, I think she studies as BTK, Dennis Rader, and Ted Bundy. And she was the professor in several classes that Kohberger took while he was at DeSalle's getting his master's degree. Now, it appears from what we know that he actually really respected her as a doctor, as maybe a person that he would want to follow, maybe in their footsteps, do more of what she does. Is there like a disconnect between how he feels towards younger girls who he may be physically attracted to, and an older professor who may be really brilliant but old enough where he's not attracted to her? Is there some sort of fact that he could turn off the anger towards a woman based on how he perceives her as not being one of them, as being a person who he needs to learn from and respects in every which way, and then a younger girl who he may feel that he's physically attracted to, but she doesn't offer him anything in terms of respect?
I think that's a great question. And my sense of that, Mike, is that, first of all, very few people are that black and white. So if you ask Bryan Kohberger if he loves his mom, he probably says yes, he probably does. He probably loves his sisters. We know, it seems like from what we've been told and what's public information, that he had some problems with some of his professors who were for women at WSU as well. So it's not just the fact, I think, that he does have this maybe anger or resentment toward women who he finds attractive and who are not attracted to him. I would definitely agree with you that I definitely think that he's more likely to get triggered with that anger and resentment when he's around women who are more his age, who are attractive, that he would be interested in, or that perhaps even remind him of women who he's been interested in the past that have not been interested in him. But I don't think it means because somebody has this resentment or this anger toward women that they hate all women.
Thank you.
Very, very interesting. But some of his searches, though, Dr. Joni, and let's face it, he was studying to be a criminologist. So searching other serial killers wouldn't be that out of the ordinary, because that was part of his field of study. However, some of his other searches of the sexual nature, and specifically some of the porn and the violent porn he was looking for, that could raise a few flags and be a bit disturbing. Your thoughts, Dr. Joni?
I agree. I think that you're right. I mean, when I hear about searches about, sexual or pornography that involves women sleeping or being unable to resist or that kind of thing, it certainly tells me this is somebody who who's attracted to this idea of having complete control over somebody in a sexual way. So not so much you're looking necessarily for an equal partner or somebody they can have that kind of genuine relationship, but somebody they can dominate and have this sense of control over. And I think when we look at some of, Bryan Kohberger's background, it makes sense. I mean, it's not uncommon, I think, for people who felt bullied in the past, who felt helpless or victimized in the past by other people, to want control. But the form it's taken in terms of having this sexual interest in completely powerless women, I think, is disturbing and concerning.
So would that be the type of woman he would have been attracted to, women that were maybe of a more passive nature, a timid type of woman?
I'm certainly speculating here about him, but I would certainly say, so I want to be sure I say that, and I'll say it probably more than once as we're talking, but I think what I'm saying is not necessarily. So for example, if I have this fantasy of being in complete control, it may not have a lot to do with who my partner or my victim maybe is, as much as it is the interaction that we have. So I might want to have somebody who's very outgoing or very powerful in some respects. And the fantasy that I have is I have complete control over this person. So I'm even more powerful. So it doesn't mean they're going to be attracted to a certain personality type necessarily. It just means this is a fantasy of this relationship with the opposite sex in a sexual way. What turns me on is the idea of being completely in control of this person who, if you're asleep or you're powerless in some respects, you're like an object, right? You're not participating in this, at least willingly or knowingly.
Jane C in the chat, his beating up Kaylee near death was aligned with his intrigue of women passed out. And Jane C, thank you for that comment. Stephen Gonsalves, the dad of Kaylee Gonsalves, he volunteered that the killer, and whether it's Bryan Kohberger or not, actually beat his daughter up with his fists and hit her to the face prior to stabbing her. And that was the first time we had heard that, and that was coming from Steve Gonzalez, who I have nothing but admiration for during this whole thing. He's been such a strong person and the representative, really. That's he and his wife there, his wife Christy. I can't even imagine how he gets through his days, but he volunteered that, and that to me was pretty damn spooky. That he beat her with his fist. Like, what was that all about? He came there with a K-bar knife to murder. Well, it's thought that his target was Madison Mogen, who was sleeping in the same bed, the same room as Kaylee Gonzalez. So that's changing the whole attack, it would seem to me, based on what transpired during the attack. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, that is kind of interesting. They think it's Mogen because they were in Mogen's bedroom, and he wouldn't have counted on Kaylee being there. He would expect that only Madison Mogen will be sleeping in that bed. But it is rather strange as you bring it up, and I'm thinking about it as you're talking, because if you go in there, and I'm sure he had his knife out or in his hand, I'm sure if he's going to attack Madison, but then maybe Kaylee wakes up or Kaylee sees what's going on, he might then change his attack. But at that point, what does he do with his knife? If he basically beat her to an inch of her life and then maybe stabbed her, he'd probably have to put the knife down, and maybe that's where the knife and the sheath got disconnected and forgot all about it. That may have unnerved him. But that does seem rather strange that you would go. It's like going into to shoot somebody, but instead of shooting somebody, you grab a knife out of a kitchen drawer and stab them. It just seems like there's a disconnect there, a real disconnect.
Dr. Joni, I had always thought, and I'll put a picture of the 4 victims up on the screen. Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Zana Knodel, and Ethan Chapin. And I think that Kohberger probably thought that he was going into a house with just females. I don't think he expected Ethan Chapin to be there. In fact, he was not supposed to be there. So I see this, and from my cop mind, from my investigator mind, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I've been wrong many times before and will be wrong many times in the future. I see this as a psychosexual murder right from Jump Street. And no one was really dwelling on this except the really smart people like you right from the beginning. Your thoughts, Dr. Joni?
Well, let me put on my forensic psychology hat. You were talking about looking at it from a cop's perspective, putting on my forensic psychology hat and just thinking about some of the offenders that I've interviewed and evaluated. And I think the speculation, and it is, of course, because only if Bryan Kohberger is guilty of this, he's the only person who knows. But I almost wonder if he went into looking for Maddie Mogen with the idea of doing more to her than just stabbing her to death. I wonder if he had a fantasy of perhaps using the knife to scare her and rape her and then maybe kill her. We don't know that, but that's my speculation, and it would fit some of the theories that I have about this case. And he would have been just absolutely enraged to find Kaylee Gonzalez in that bed, and that would have just ruined everything for him. So I can see him seeing her there and just being furious that this was an unexpected. I mean, I can only imagine, again, if he's the person who did it, how many hours he spent planning this and thinking about it and thinking how perfectly he's planned out every single detail. Then to think about going upstairs and finding somebody that you're not expecting. And so I think that may have just disrupted the whole plan. And so instead of him being able to kind of take his time with maybe Madison, instead he ends up beating Kaylee, because he's furious this happened. And then at this point, he can't, he ends up just killing both of them. And then on the way out, I've always wondered if he encountered one or both of them. I don't think he necessarily planned to kill Xana or Ethan.
Yeah.
You
until
know,
he
Doc-
until he came across them, of course, and then it was different.
and that he had to. You know, Dr. Joni, from a police perspective, I always thought that, and this is why, you know, I think the crime of burglary, which this is, of course, it's a burglary among many other things, but the crime of burglary, to do it in a house that's occupied, you have fully intent to kill people, because if the owners or the occupants of that house wake up while you're invading their home, they are allowed by law to kill you. So I always thought a burglar is one of the most dangerous criminals on this earth. And politicians these days poo-poo burglary like, oh, they're just in there to steal. No, they are not. Someone that goes into someone's home, invades their personal space while people are home, the game is on, and they will do anything to get away. Mike.
Yeah, Bill. I mean, I remember being in the Bronx in the 4-6, and there was a number of cases where the owner was there, and it turned into a severe beating. In one case, a rape. It was horrific because they're trapped. They're in there. The owner wakes up, or the owner walks in on it, and the owner and the perp are trapped together, and it's survival of the fittest at that point. It's like it's who's going to get out alive. So yeah, I've always thought burglaries are very violent, but yeah, a lot of people don't feel that way. But if you're in law enforcement, you realize how violent burglaries are.
100%.
I agree with both of you. I think that we forensic psychologists really for years underestimated that in terms of violence risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did seem to see burglaries as not as, because they in of themselves, they don't encounter anybody. It's not a violent offense other than breaking into somebody's home. But you're absolutely right. If somebody will go into your house while you are there, they are prepared to do just about anything else, because it's going to, if it comes down to them or you, we know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny how they've tried to classify burglary as a non-violent crime? Isn't that unbelievable? To me, it is. And I don't want to get too political, but I'm just baffled by that. How any human being, whether on the left side or right side, can classify burglary as a non-violent crime, a property crime, you know,
Right.
when the eventuality of what we just discussed can happen if people are home, you know, just crazy. Let me play this quick little snippet from the show.
Mingling and socializing, and started chatting with this guy, and he had told me that he had just moved and he was starting his PhD.
A woman is recalling the moment she met the man who would later be accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students. It's now been more than 2 years since the tragic deaths of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Gonzalez, Xana Kernodle, and Conway native Ethan Chapin. And as we get closer to Bryan Kohberger's trial date, we're also learning new details about what led up to his arrest. That includes video and digital evidence that investigators say track Kohberger's movements from the night of the murders. Dateline spoke with former students as well as the victims' friends, who are now opening up for the first time about their interactions with Kohberger.
The wording of the text as I look back on it is kind of peculiar. It was almost overly formal. I really enjoy that activity. So, you know, can you follow up with me about that?
You can watch the 2 hours.
So she was almost on a date with Bryan Kohberger. She was willing. She was willing to go on a date with him, and then something freaked her out in his language, in his text message, that it was too formal. And, you know, Dr. Joni, I love that, because I will tell people from being a cop, go with your instincts. If the hair on the back of your neck is standing up, don't do it. You know, use your instincts. Your instincts are 100% correct.
Absolutely. And, you know, the other thing I think that, you know, I know that he has received some diagnoses. You know, he's been evaluated, I think, in March of 2025. His defense attorney has released, I think, some information about that. And, you know, he's, based on what I've read about this evaluation, he has been diagnosed with high functioning autism, or level 1 autism. And, you know, one of the things that we know, that certainly doesn't mean anything about criminal behavior at all. Let me be sure I say that. But one of the things we do know sometimes is that, you know, in some individuals, the social cues and social interactions and the ability to really connect with people can be more challenging than it can be for somebody without that diagnosis. And I wonder, from what we've heard in terms of some of the things that women have said who've encountered him, that kind of disconnect, or, he stared at me and didn't say anything, or, he didn't make eye contact. This kind of social miscues seem to be a problem for him. And of course, it certainly reached other levels as well. I mean, in terms of him saying very inappropriate and kind of aggressive things to women, which I don't attribute to any kind of, diagnoses. I think that's something that was a problem in him. But I do think that may well be true, that he has this sense of this awkwardness that he doesn't seem to understand sometimes. And the problem for him is that it's always somebody else. It seems like there's no insight into, okay, what is the common denominator here? If I'm being rejected over and over again, or people have responded to me in a certain way over and over again, maybe I need to look inward and kind of go, okay, what am I doing or not doing that's putting people off? As opposed to it being, I'm angry at everybody else because they're rejecting me. It's their fault.
What are people that are, say, would be violent criminals? And I feel that had Bryan Kohberger, if he is in fact, he's innocent until proven guilty, if he is in fact convicted of this crime, it seems to me he has the personality and a lot of the traits of a potential serial killer. And I see that if he would have gotten away with this, that he would have continued committing more murders. And again, that's I'm presuming, and I'm assuming that he is guilty in this case. But he seems to have all the traits of a serial killer. And by the way, folks asked me the other day, and according to the FBI definition of serial killers, it's 2 incidents separated by time. You do the killer kills one person or a group of people, then with time in between, days, weeks, months, does another one. That makes you a serial killer. Google has it all wrong. Google says 3. So don't believe Google, believe the FBI. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, when you mentioned about your, the hair on the back of your neck, I was thinking about a book years ago. I can't think of the name of the author, but it was called The Gift of Fear. And it tells people, don't worry about sometimes social cues and trying not to be impolite to people. If you feel that you are in danger, listen. It's your primeval caveman, cavewoman instinct telling you to survive and get out of there. So if anybody wants to read a good book on instinctual crime prevention, personal crime prevention, it's called The Gift of Fear. I'm thinking about Kohberger, and I'm looking at this case, and people have said he's probably killed before, and maybe in Pennsylvania, people have suggested that he skinned a dog and all kinds of other strange things that he has not been connected to in any way, shape, or form. But I'm wondering, and I do agree with you, Billy. I think that if he is truly the killer and he'd done this and gotten away with it, he would have killed again, probably for the intellectual stimulation it gives him and getting away and having the power and domination. But I'm not so sure that that he's done something before. This may be the kind of thing, and I don't know, Dr. Joni, do you think if this would be the kind of thing that he would start out doing rather than just killing an animal, because this is so horrific. To start out doing something like this is so far beyond the pale. Do you think that this is his first? If he indeed is the killer, that could possibly be the first crime he's done?
I do. And I think that is pretty unusual to think about, having killed 4 people as your first crime. And I also am of the opinion that if he had gotten away with that, I would not be surprised. I would be surprised if he did not plan to kill again. And that's based on some of his alleged behavior after the fact. The thumbs up in the shower, taking this picture, being happy, all the Google searches about Ted Bundy, which again, I've got plenty of searches on my computer for Ted Bundy, but there's a little bit of a different context there that, in terms of behavior. So
yes, we were going to investigate you, Dr. Joni.
I'm completely in agreement that this would have been maybe the first of more attempts, at least. I don't get a sense that this is somebody who's done this before. And I don't think he necessarily went in planning to kill 4 people. I think he thought about this plan for a long period of time and went in planning to kill 1 person. And then the circumstances were different. He ended up killing 4. But I think he did, the fact that he bought this K-bar knife allegedly, 8 months before that, there's all this planning that kind of went into it. He seems to be incredibly proud based on the pictures that he shows of him doing the thumbs up and those kinds of things. I think of him as being somewhat obsessive in terms of planning and those kinds. So I would be surprised if he had killed before. Now the animal thing is interesting because that certainly is, and I know, Mike, you can speak to this as well as I can. We know that there's a higher percentage, certainly, of serial killers who have abused animals, but the majority of serial killers have not. So we see a significant minority who have, but there is somewhat of a myth that all serial killers or all violent offenders started out with animals. As a matter of fact, I would often make this joke that, doing as many interviews with violent offenders, I've met many who would be just appalled at the thought of anybody hurting an animal. As a matter of fact, they'd be first in line to kill the person who hurt the animal. So there's no perfect correlation there. Right. There's a higher percentage, but it's not perfect.
Okay.
I just have to bring this comment up. Honeycomb, instincts can lead to preconceived notions, discrimination, etc. That's too bad. And I'll say I've known women that have gone into apartment buildings and had a man they didn't know trying to get in at the door, and their instincts told them not to let the guy in, but they were afraid of being accused of being prejudiced. They let the guy in and got raped. So, if your instincts, I don't care if someone's not going to like that you did that. What this is called is self-preservation, and someone can dust themselves off and if they feel appalled that you didn't open the door for them. That's too bad. Your instincts, that's what we're talking about. The animal kingdom, and we're part of the animal kingdom, has instincts, and your instincts are telling you something. Go with it. I'm telling you that right now. Honeycomb, I don't know you. If the hair on the back of your neck is standing up, you believe it.
And I think there is a difference. I totally understand where she's coming from, and that we don't want to be in a position where we're evaluating somebody based on their race or their age or their gender or anything like that. I think that is different than having that hair on the back of your neck stand up. I mean, I worked in a maximum security prison for a couple of years, and I can tell you that only happened to me 2 times in 2 years. So I'm with people who've done a lot of bad things, and yet I interacted with a lot of people, and I never had that hair on the back of my neck stand up. So it is, I think, a very primal thing when all of a sudden you have this sense that this person is dangerous in some way, something is not right. And I think that's the thing that I think we're talking about in terms of that just kind of primitive feeling of unease, that something is not right here. It's when we start second guessing that we can get in trouble, I think.
100%, and I appreciate you explained it much better. I explained it the caveman way. You explained it from the forensic psychologist way. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. If you like real crime, true crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, hit the like button. That really helps us out with the algorithm. Share us with your friends and your family if you want to contribute to us financially. We have a Patreon with 4 different levels, and we also have a YouTube channel membership with 5 different levels, and you can join our YouTube channel and be a member of the YouTube Police Off the Cuff family. I want to play a little bit of this, and I know you know this guy, Dr. Joni, and he's tremendous. I've had him on the show before, and you'll recognize him right away, Jim Clemente. Here we go.
Surviving roommates. They really do explain. And we know that one of them said she'd been out drinking. This was a weekend night. They'd all been out partying and doing things until really, really late, until the early morning hours. It helps shed a little more light on what was going on inside that house.
Sure. It definitely explains the delay in contacting 911 because obviously they were confused. They were afraid, obviously, but there was a lot of chaos going on in that house. There was a lot of disbelief and confusion. And I think they were slowly coming to the belief that something very bad happened. They're putting pieces together. These are basically just kids, and
Yeah.
they've never been in this situation before. They never should have been in this situation.
And one of the roommates said that she had been drinking that night. She described herself as being drunk, and that she wasn't even sure that she had seen what she had seen, or if in fact maybe she had dreamed it. So on top of all, it's 4:30 in the morning. You add in that factor, they're not even sure what they're seeing.
Exactly. They've never experienced this before. They didn't know really what was happening. Of course, you have a guy, they don't know. It's an open house. People come in and out all the time. So they didn't know that this person was definitely an intruder who had very bad intentions.
When this story first emerged, you drew on some of your profiling experience and said that you thought that the killer either had a relationship with one or more people inside the house, or that he'd been stalking somebody in the house.
Right.
Has your analysis changed now that Bryan Kohberger's been arrested and we're learning all these details?
Yeah, I think the information that we have tells me that there was at least pre-attack surveillance, and that is a form of stalking. Basically, this person who committed this crime didn't just do it on a whim. They thought about this for a long time. They actually built up fantasies about how it would go. And in order to actually make the plans, they most likely were in the neighborhood, looking at that place, looking at other potential places they could attack, and chose this one based on the situation.
What would make somebody do something like this?
Well, I think the best indicator is basically what his behavior was. I mean, the fact that he left his phone back at his house. He was planning this. His studies, for example, give an insight into what he wanted to do. But the fact is, I think he wanted to commit the perfect crime in his mind. And unfortunately, these victims were the just luck of the draw. And it's like I said, it should never have happened. But the fact is that he wanted the notoriety. He wanted to be able to pull off something that he thought nobody else could. He thought he was smarter than everybody else in the world.
What do you make?
So he gives a great little summation there. And Dr. Joni, one of the things I want to ask you, clearly, we said a lot on our show, we use different language. He reconned 1122 King Road, and according to the prosecution, they had 23 phone pings within 100 meters. And I'm not going to argue with all the people in the chat, because the defense has another expert that says, oh, the phone pings could have been 10 miles away. Well, the FBI is saying they have 23 phone pings within 100 meters of 1122 King Road. He was reconning that location. Was part of that recon, part of the planning, was that part of his psychosexual excitement?
I'm sure it served a dual purpose. I'm sure that played into the fantasies, and he could certainly engage in those fantasies as he was stalking. And then, of course, it served a practical purpose as well, right? It's kind of a rehearsal to some extent. But I thought it was kind of interesting that the interviewer with Jim Clemente was saying, you had talked about them having a relationship, or at least had stalked somebody. And the first thing I thought was, I would imagine if Bryan Kohberger was targeting Maddie Mogen, he had a relationship with her in his mind. Right. So he had a relationship with her. It's a fantasy relationship. She has no relationship with him. But I think that's part of that relationship in a weird kind of way, right? Is him stalking and him, figuring out what he's going to do and fantasizing and maybe looking at his knife and who knows what else he was doing. But I absolutely believe it was a dual purpose thing. Part of it, I definitely think there was a psychosexual component to this murder. The fact maybe he wanted to commit a perfect crime. I'm not arguing with that. That could have been part of it. He certainly is a very intellectual guy. Everybody who's known him has said that. Very smart, kind of rigid in some respects. Very, I can see him putting a lot of time and attention to detail and wanting to pull off the perfect crime. But I do think the basic underlying motive was psychosexual in nature.
I agree with you, Dr. Joni. And the other thing I thought of, with this selfie, it's obviously it's a celebratory selfie. There he is with his thumb up in the air. That was at 10:31 hours on the morning of the murders. This was clearly taken so that he could relive that day, that time, and that crime at a future date. And that is the sign of a serial killer. It's one of the things that serial killers love to do. In fact, going back to the crime scene, serial killers are known to do that, but he went back at 9:30 in the morning. Well, was he going back to retrieve the sheath, or was he going back just to see what was going on? That's the question. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, Bill, it's really strange because he's again he's alleged to have done this. We're not so sure. We're not sure. He hasn't had his trial, but if it is him, to leave around 4:25, 4:30 in the morning, get back to Pullman, Washington about 5:30 after ditching clothes and the weapon, and he's pumped up on adrenaline. He goes, and then he goes back there around 9:30 in the morning. It's daylight. Everybody's up. He probably thought there would be, in my estimation, he probably went back to see the ambulances there with the lights on, the police cars there, the fire trucks there. He wanted to see the terror in people's faces. That's my guess. And, that's from a police perspective. That's what he wanted. He wanted to relive that. And he was probably really surprised and disappointed to find out that nothing had happened since he had left. And, the people were coming and going, and the people inside the house still had yet woken up and called the police. So it's really strange. And then when you look at that, he then goes back to his apartment in Pullman, Washington, and he takes a shower. Very, very interesting morning he had. But I think it was probably to relive in a way what was going on. And I don't think he dared go back into that house because it was so light and there was probably so many people walking around. He knew he could easily be seen in broad daylight coming in and out of that house. But he wanted to, in my estimation, relive what he had done with the police there and the fire department there and the ambulance there, but was probably sorely disappointed.
I find it so interesting. And when I was in homicide on the NYPD, when we'd have a murder like on the street or just inside a building, it would attract a crowd, sometimes of hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 people, depending on like a summer night or something. And I would always take pictures of the crowd. And that was for a dual purpose. One was, could the killer be in the crowd? Yes. The other one was witnesses in the crowd that if you grabbed them later on, they would say, I was anywhere near there. And you show them, really, I took this picture and you were there, you were in the crowd. And that's sort of, it's the same thing when I would ask someone we canvass the scene, say, could I get your phone number? I don't want to interview you right here. I'll call you as soon as I get into the squad. And they'd be like, yeah, 64610. And I'd call them right there. And I go, why are you playing me? Because they gave me the wrong number on purpose, So I would always test the number right on the scene. So these are little tricks you learn. But I always thought it was fascinating that a killer might come back to the scene just to witness his handiwork even. I've seen killers go back to the scene of guys they shot dead on the street, and they're in the crowd watching the police activity. What is that all about?
I think that shows what we really all know, which is emotions are stronger than logic at the end of the day. Psychological needs, those drives, almost always end up trumping, logic. You think about why we make purchases, for example, which is not a great example, but it's true. We make them on emotion most of the time, and then we justify them with logic. We can talk ourselves into it. I think it's the same thing. I'm sure he could not stay away because he wanted to see that. He wanted to get that affirmation that he did have this control and this power. Look at all these people running around at this crime scene. Look at all the scared college students that I've caused. No matter the risk, in his mind, again, if he is the person who did this, it was worth it.
Yeah, it's sort of like it's sort of a thrill, I think, and I think it's all part of this, the pleasure or whatever, the sick pleasure someone that would do something like this would get out of it, to go back to the scene and to just get that thrill, like, oh, all these police are here, all this stuff's happening because of me. I did this, but I'm the only one that knows that I did this. No one else knows this, and I'm going to get away with this because I'm smarter than the police. I'm smarter than the investigators, and I'm smarter than anyone that was in that house. So I'm going to get away with this. Or at least that's what, if Bryan Kohberger is the killer, that's what he thought, Mike.
Yeah, Billy, it's really strange because you see the amount of violence and that he committed, and you think it starts out with one in Madison Mogen and it ends up with four because of the circumstances. Maybe Zaina going into the hallway, saying who's in the house, and him being bugged out by that. And then I'm thinking, is it possible that he had help? Dr. Joni, do you think he had any sort of help whatsoever in planning this or in executing this at all? Or do you think this is totally Bryan living in his head?
If I had to put my money on it, if I was a betting person, I would bet a lot of money that he did not. Okay. And that's based on, again, public information that talks about what a loner he was. The fact that he had very few friends, that he preferred to be alone. He would go hiking alone. And so it's hard for me to imagine him having the kind of relationship with anybody who'd be willing to assist him in this.
Yeah, one of the things that, and again, we've been covering this case since it happened, but many people are doubting the strength of circumstantial evidence. And Mike and I are huge proponents of the strength of circumstantial evidence from which inferences are drawn. That is the definition right out of the book, right? And if there's 2 or 3 pieces of circumstantial evidence, okay, I'll jump on your wagon and I'll ride out of town with you. But when there's hundreds of pieces of circumstantial evidence that when you were a kid, didn't you do those coloring books where you connected the dots? That's what criminal investigation is. Connect the dots. And part of this is when we heard just in the last couple of weeks, the Amazon order that he ordered the K-bar knife, the sheath and a sharpener 8 months before this crime. To me, that is extremely powerful evidence. By itself, I wouldn't argue. Yeah, it's nothing. But connect all the other things. The white Hyundai Elantra, of course, what to me is the smoking gun of evidence is his touch DNA on the knife sheath next to Madison Mogen's body in the bed. Now, so many people try to discount that too. Oh, that doesn't mean anything. It's single source DNA. I mean, all of a sudden, everyone's a DNA expert, Single source there. What do you know about singles? Nothing. So you're just repeating what you heard someone else say. Mike, your thoughts?
Yeah, Bill, when that's the beauty of circumstantial evidence is DNA is circumstantial evidence, blood, fingerprints, hairs, all kinds of things are circumstantial evidence. And all it takes is for a jury to see a logical connection between them and the guilt, or it could be the innocence of a person, because you could use circumstantial evidence to actually show innocence of that person. So the fact that there is not an eyewitness that said they actually saw this crime being committed, or there's videotape of him actually committing the crime, actually doing the deed, or his own admissions. The fact is that there is so many pieces. And one of the things I do like too is a piece is the fact that at the time, he had not changed his registration from Pennsylvania to Washington, because in Washington and Idaho, you need 2 license plates, one in the front, one in the back. But in Pennsylvania, where he had come from and where his car was registered, it only had 1 license plate, and that's in the back. To me, that's a telltale sign too. And the idea that he would drive his own car to commit this crime, and then the morning of go back about 9:30 when it's broad daylight, driving the same car. To me, it's a real disconnect between what, I guess this is his first foray into homicide, because he doesn't have the street common sense that a thug would have, because he takes his own car to the crime scene. Very strange.
Mike, sometimes people just get away with things because it's just luck. It's just cause. It's not because they figured anything out most criminals are the dumbest people I've ever met in my life. But sometimes even the dumbest criminals get away with things, and it's just the luck of the draw. They just get lucky and get away with things. So, and can you explain that? You can't always explain it. Dr. Joni, I can see you're agreeing with me. I like that. I like when a forensic psychologist agrees with me.
That's always so tough. I mean, I think that makes your job so much harder. It did, because it's just, you know, we all want the world to work the way it's supposed to, right? There to be justice and in all kinds of things. And yet you're right. I mean, sometimes it is just luck. But at the same time, I think when you have somebody who's perhaps committing a crime for the first time, again, if Bryan Kohberger is the person who's guilty, I think it's very difficult. No matter how much you plan and how much you think, you're not a career criminal. You haven't gone around the barn 100 times. You haven't thought through everything. You haven't had all these experiences where you've learned, the easy way or the hard way, that when you don't do this or you do this, bad things happen or you wind up in jail. And so that doesn't surprise me to that extent that he would make a mistake like that, where you kind of go, you did all this planning over here and yet you drove your own car.
Right.
You know, when I was in robbery, I was the commanding officer of the RIP unit in the 2-4 in the west side of Manhattan and the 2-3 in El Barrio, Spanish Harlem. And we used to say, for every time a robber gets arrested, he gets away with about 30 or 40 of them. You know, so think of how, and this was when robbers were prolific back in the day, how prolific they were, and to think of the ratio of how many times they get away with it and how many times they actually get caught. And I wonder if that's true with other crimes other than robbery. And I'm sure it must be, maybe not at that ratio level, but it absolutely is. Carol Grayston, thank you so much. She gifted 5 Police Off the Cuff memberships for 5 lucky people who will be joining the Police Off the Cuff family. Carol, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. I want to play, this is Steve Gonsalves with our favorite Ashley Banfield.
By NBC. One of the ones I found so upsetting was the allegation that these are pictures of University of Idaho girls on Bryan Kohberger's phone. Do you have any idea if Kaylee was among them?
I don't know. But I find it very telling that there was other students that are supposed to be in their friend circles that are on that phone for sure.
And do you know anything more about what that mother, Angela Naveja's, with the daughter Ashlyn, who was best friends with Maddie? Do you know anything more about that child's story? I mean, that girl's story. You know, Ashlyn was supposed to spend the night there. It's just so upsetting to think, what happened? Why didn't she?
I don't know the details on Ashlyn. I definitely know Ashlyn. I've met and hung out with her. We've done fundraisers together, and her mother. So, yeah, I know that she spent. You know, she used to be a roommate there. So, I'm a little surprised at how that night, but I'm not surprised that she would be over there and hanging out with the girls at all.
Boy, have you had a chance to talk with her since the revelation that she was supposed to be there and wasn't, and decided not to be?
No, and I just heard that she doesn't want to come back to Idaho, and now I've got a daughter who's going to Texas for college now, so I kind of understand how it feels for some of these side victims, that how they feel like they just don't feel safe and they want to just run, you know, get out of the area. So her saying that is kind of rang true with our daughter.
I just also want to say again that Steve Gonsalves, the dad of Kaylee Gonsalves, what a man. I think he's tremendous. I think he's a very strong man. He's a very, I mean, obviously in the beginning of this case, he lost it. He didn't trust the police. He didn't trust the investigation, didn't trust anything. He's calmed down, and all I can do is admire this man. I really, you know, he's unbelievable. And when I look at a picture of him and his wife, Christy, all I see is sadness on their faces. You know, imagine walking around with a sad face for the rest of your life. That's got to be some burden to carry around with you, you know. But one of the things I wanted to say was very interesting, Dr. Joni, that they found on his phone pictures of students from the University of Idaho that were friends with the victims. And allegedly, some of the pictures, he actually took pictures off of Facebook with his phone. And could that have been how he was stalking these students? Because they did him a favor. They were already on social media. And could he have become obsessed with them through a social media site like Facebook? Dr. Joni, your thoughts?
I mean, people can become obsessed with, a poster of a celebrity. And we know that. So there's all different ways we could use our imagination. It wouldn't have to be that he saw this person face to face. He may have seen a picture on Facebook. He may have then tried to track this person down. I mean, I would certainly think that it would not be out of the realm of possibility if he's doing stalking or reconnaissance that he might also be kind of voyeuristic and kind of going around campus taking pictures of people that he sees or trying to do this in a way they don't see him. So that doesn't surprise me, but it would certainly be so disturbing as a parent to think that your child's picture was on his phone. Or I can't even imagine having a child who was supposed to go spend the night that night and it didn't happen. But of course, I really can't imagine what, as you have pointed out, the Gonzalez family and what they've gone through and how strong they've been and now parenting their other children and try to navigate their grief at the same time they're, parenting their own kids. It's got to be just overwhelming. That's just, it's just a Herculean task, I think.
Dr. Joni, I 100% agree with you, and trying to get on with Steve Gonsalves works a job. He's got a job to go to every day. Imagine that. Imagine having to go to your job every day and just having people looking at you in that way, sorrowful, pitiful, pitying, just looking at you in that way. And you must feel that. You must feel those eyes looking at you all the time. And then just taking care of your family and trying to give them a normal life and give them love and give them what they need when this weighs upon you 24/7 and you got to deal with this. Your grief is unbelievable, insurmountable to think of, your daughter, who Kaylee Gonzalez is the girl right in the middle, the blonde-haired girl, second from the left. Just unbelievable to carry that burden around. And Ethan Chapin was a triplet, or is a triplet. He has a brother and a sister, and he was the third of a triplet. He has the classiest family I've ever seen. And I really admire how they dealt with this also. I couldn't be like them. I'm more from the Hammurabi school of thought, but they're more from the forgiving and putting it behind them so they can get on with their life and they can think of love and positive things rather than this hateful act that was committed upon their son and three young women. Professor Mike.
Yeah, Bill, losing a grandparent or a parent when you get older, that's natural and you grieve, but you realize that's the circle of life. That's the way it goes. But to lose a child, I have three daughters. I couldn't imagine losing one of them, and especially even if it was a natural thing, like say cancer took them, or a traffic accident, but to have them taken this way is so terrible that, that's something that, probably they will never get over. That hurt will always be there, and it won't be very far under the surface. But the Gonsalveses and the Knodels and the Mogans and, the Chapins, they have to get busy living and do something positive in their lives because they have to live the rest of their lives and they have the rest of their children to take care of. And that's got to be a terrible thing because it makes it difficult to grieve because you got to take care of other people when you yourself need to be taken care of. So the Gonsalves family and all the other families, they're very strong in this. And that's good to see that they're able to keep on living and working positively and still being present for the prosecution and getting to the court. They promise to get to the court and the trial as much as they possibly can, and to be there so they're not running away from this. They're actually confronting it, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And you know, the other thing I think of, Dr. Joni, is that because Ethan Chapin is a triplet, triplets are like twins, or even more so. They feel things. They feel each other's pain. They complete each other's sentences. You know, because look, they spent 9 months in the womb together. You know, and so the separation and the anxiety that his brother and sister must feel, that Ethan is gone and they're still alive, just another level of grief that I can't even fathom.
No, I can't either. I mean, I don't know that anybody, I think that's why it's so powerful sometimes when parents who lose children are able to find other parents who've lost children, particularly in the same way. I don't know that there's any substitute. I don't think there's any therapist in the world that can be more helpful, because it's just, you know, for most of us who are parents, we can't imagine that. We can't even, who wants to imagine that you lose one of your children? And, you know, not that, you know, like, as you were saying, families handle grief very differently. There's no right or wrong way to handle grief, but to be able to talk to other people and gather support and strength with other people who've been in similar circumstances, I think seems to be one of the most healing things over time that I've seen. That, and finding some way, as I think these families are already doing, to honor the person that they lost. You know, those seem to be ways that I've seen people deal with things. But you're right. I mean, I think anybody who's lost a child, no matter what the circumstances, will tell you, the day that happened, I became a different person. I was never the same person again. Does it mean they can't be a happy person again? There can't be a person who appreciates their other children, who, you know, who continues to live, and those kinds of things. But their life will always be different because of this. And it's infuriating to me in a way. When I look at that picture of these 4 beautiful young women, and you think, young people whose lives were taken away for nothing.
Yeah, no, you know, I think that's the part of this that many people that follow true crime that haven't seen, well, most people haven't seen up close and personal real death and real violence that we've seen, you know. And it's real violence is really ugly. You know, I can tell you that firsthand. It's really just ugly, and it's very tough to deal with. I've had to make death notifications. I worked at the morgue during 9/11, not steadily, but quite a few, probably 5-6 times when the bodies were first being brought in there. That was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, you know, looking at the conditions. I don't want to get too graphic, but you get the picture, you know. And I think that in a way, following true crime is sort of voyeuristic. You know, being a cop is voyeuristic. Being an investigator is voyeuristic. And maybe that's that whole thing of seeing things that no one else gets to see. And maybe that's part of what the attractiveness of why we go into this business. Maybe that's the attractiveness of why you've gone into forensic psychology. It's sort of the same thing, seeing a part of the world and a part of life, a part of society that no one else gets to see, but you get to see that.
I think that there's a truth to that. I do. And I think, you know, one of the things I try to ask myself regularly is, you know, how am I using this information to help? How am I using this information to prevent something else like this from happening? How can I use this? How can I tell a story in the media in a way that's going to honor the victims, that's going to provide education, to provide a safety tip or whatever? Because we are talking about other people's lives, and we don't feel what they feel. We feel a tremendous amount of sadness that we didn't lose our child, we didn't lose our sister or our brother or whatever. We can't know what that's like really on the inside. But there are things I think that we can do, like we're doing, which is, you know, supporting the families and promoting justice as much as it can be done, and trying to figure out ways. I'm speaking as a forensic psychologist now, finding ways to try to do better, you know, to identify people who are more likely to commit violence and try to intervene earlier and those kinds of things.
That's very admirable, Dr. Joni. It really is.
Thank you.
You said it very well, Mike.
Yeah,
I'm going to go to you. Hold, Mike. These are your final thoughts.
Okay, I just had just one question, real quick, for Dr. Joni.
Sure.
Okay, Dr. Joni, was there any, in your opinion, from what you know, was there any warning signs at all that people missed about this guy, if he is indeed the killer? Is there anything that might have stood out more than anything other to give anyone an idea that this guy was really whacked out and super mortally dangerous?
There's nothing that's been publicly made available. I mean, there were obviously some problems. This guy, you know, had just been let go from he was actually eventually was let go from his internship. He was having some problems and those kinds of things. I think, and again, this is public information. I think the best people to answer that question would be his family.
Okay.
And I know that there was some public information about his sister, at least one of his sisters, suspecting that he may have been involved. I don't know if that's true. But if it is, I think that might be your answer.
Okay, thank you.
In fact, Dr. Joni, that the picture I put on, that's his sisters right there on the screen. And apparently, at least one of his sisters was suspicious of that he may have been the killer. So, and that's, you know, that's not, I'm not getting that firsthand. I'm getting that second, third hand. So I don't know
same here.
for sure if that's true. But look, I've been saying this from the very beginning. I think the prosecution has tons more evidence that we don't even know about, that it will make it clear to everyone they got the right guy. You know, I think they got the right guy right now, but I think there's going to be even more evidence that's going to convince all they call them the pro-burgers instead of the co-burgers, you know, and I think they got the right guy. Mike, I'm going to give you your final thoughts. I'll go to Dr. Joni, and then I know Dr. Joni, she's from the left coast, even though it's a little earlier there, right? 3 hours earlier. So go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say thank you very much to Dr. Joni Johnston, because I learned a whole heck of a lot, and not being in that discipline of being a criminologist, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Dr. Joni. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. As you, both of you know, this is one of my favorite shows to be on. But I learned a lot from you as well. I do. I love hearing about your experience and trying to envision what that must be like and what it has been like in the past. And, you know, I have nothing but admiration for the work that both of you have done and continue to do now as advocates, really, for justice and for victims. So the feeling is mutual.
Dr. Joni, I just want to thank you, because whenever I call you, you're so willing to come on this show, and you're so, and usually the way I work, I usually give people 3 hours notice, you know, which for most people is not enough notice, but from whatever, you always come up to the plate for me, and I want to thank you for that. And,
if I can, I always will. So
you're great, and you're so articulate, you're so smart, and we love having you on the show. So thank you.
Thank you. I look forward to all of us, you know, following this case, hopefully, to the family seeing some justice. Absolutely.
Folks, again, if you're not subscribed, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, share us with your friends and your family. Thank you. So it was a great show tonight, really great show. I thought the pacing, everything, we got some really great information from Dr. Joni. I hope you guys watching the show enjoyed it. Have a great night, everyone. I'm Bill Cannon for Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories. God bless. We'll see you the next time.
One episode just ain't enough.